German baron named Munchausen was riding his horse along a country road when, suddenly, his horse stepped into a swamp and began sinking. The baron looked around. There was no one in sight, no stones to step on, no branches to grab. His horse seemed to sense its impending doom, struggling desperately. At this critical moment, a light bulb went off in the baron's head. An idea struck him. Then, incredibly, he grabbed his own hair and pulled himself out of the swamp, saving his poor horse in the process. Of course, don't try pulling your own hair at home. Newton wouldn't rest in his grave if the reason Munchausen could supposedly pull himself out may be because Newton hadn't been born yet in that era. This seemingly absurd tale has intrigued philosophers, leading to what is known as the Munchausen trilemma, a concept used to describe a complex social phenomenon. The trilemma consists of three logical paradoxes: infinite regression, circular reasoning, and dogmatism. Let's start with infinite regression. If we had the chance to ask Munchausen in person how he managed to pull himself out, he might say he had enough strength. If we then asked him how he got that strength, he might reply that he exercised regularly. If we continued asking how he exercised, he might attribute it to a healthy diet and lifestyle. We could keep questioning indefinitely, falling into an endless loop of explanations. In real life, we often encounter similar situations. When trying to prove a point, we may cite evidence, but that evidence itself requires further evidence to support it, leading to an infinite chain of reasoning with no clear conclusion. In scientific research, this challenge frequently arises. For example, when studying the origin of life, we might ask how life emerged from inorganic matter. This question then leads to another: how was inorganic matter formed? And that question, in turn, brings us to the origin of the universe. This endless chain of questioning forces scientists to establish fundamental assumptions to avoid falling into an infinite regression. Some argue that the end of science is theology, citing figures like Newton and Einstein as proof. However, science itself is about explaining mysterious phenomena in a way that makes them no longer mysterious. For instance, people once believed that an apple falling to the ground was an act of divine power. Later, Newton proposed the theory of gravity, seemingly dispelling the mystery. But then, what exactly is gravity? Why does it apply to both molecules and planets alike? These fundamental questions can only be pursued so far before they must stop. Thus, saying that science ultimately leads to theology is simply acknowledging that the most basic principles cannot be infinitely explained. To avoid this dilemma, we must set reasonable boundaries, determining which questions do not need further inquiry. For example, when discussing why Earth is round, we can rely on scientific observations and theories, such as the effects of rotation and gravity, which lead to a spherical shape. We don't need to question why gravity has this effect, because at some point, fundamental scientific principles are widely accepted. Just as Munchausen couldn't have escaped the swamp without an external force, we must recognize that some foundational assumptions are necessary to build upon. Otherwise, we end up in an infinite loop of questions, like the age-old which came first, the chicken or the egg? This brings us to the second paradox, circular reasoning. You've probably heard statements like, women don't use logic, and those who use logic aren't real women. Or, a good horse never eats grass it once left behind, because if it does, it's not a good horse. These arguments may sound complete at first glance, but something feels off. That's because they rely on circular reasoning. Circular reasoning is when an argument avoids the actual process of proof by using the claim itself as evidence, making it appear valid while offering no real justification. Lu Xun, a famous Chinese writer, mocked this fallacy in his essay on the soul. I curse traitors, proving I am a patriot. Patriots speak truth, so what I say must be right. Since I am right, traitors are speechless. This kind of reasoning remains prevalent today, especially online. Patriotism itself isn't wrong, but using it as a shield to justify harmful behavior will only lead to legal consequences. Historical events like protests and social movements have often seen victims of circular reasoning. Circular reasoning is a logical fallacy. When trying to prove a point, if the reasoning loops back on itself, the argument is invalid. To avoid this, we should seek independent evidence and clear explanations to support our claims. For instance, saying a drug is effective because many people used it and got better is a form of circular reasoning. Instead, we should look for controlled clinical trials comparing its effects against a placebo. Developing critical thinking skills helps us avoid such fallacies. When hearing or making an argument, we should ask ourselves, is there actual evidence? Does it follow logical reasoning? Are there alternative explanations? Now, let's discuss the final paradox. Dogmatism. We all know Munchausen's story is fictional, just as we know fairy tales from childhood aren't real. There's no Santa Claus, and going to the bathroom alone at night won't summon ghosts. Yet, as children, we still believed in Santa and feared the dark. Why? Because authority figures, our parents, told us so. Dogmatism is a rigid way of thinking where people accept certain beliefs as absolute truths without questioning them. This mindset leads to a narrow and inflexible understanding of the world. Dogmatic individuals refuse to consider opposing views, believing their perspective is the only correct one. For example, some traditional beliefs dictate that boys must be strong and unemotional, while girls should be gentle and good at housework. These stereotypes ignore individual differences and force people into predefined roles. In reality, boys can be vulnerable and girls can be strong. Rigidly following such beliefs stifles personal growth. Dogmatism appears in everyday life. Parents may insist their children follow a specific career path because they know what's best. They might say, "I've crossed more bridges than you've walked roads." Or, "You must get into a top university to have a good future." While experience is valuable, treating opinions as absolute truths limits independent thought and decision-making. In science, dogmatism is particularly dangerous. The essence of science is questioning and verification. When scientists rigidly adhere to a theory and ignore new data, progress stalls. For example, in the early 19th century, scientists believed in the phlogiston theory, the idea that burning released a mysterious substance called phlogiston. This was widely accepted until Antoine Lavoisier's experiments proved combustion was actually a reaction with oxygen. Science advances by challenging dogma. So, how can we avoid dogmatism? First, we must cultivate independent thinking. When presented with information, we should ask, is there evidence? Is it logical? Are there alternative perspectives? Second, we should keep an open mind, respecting diverse viewpoints and engaging in rational discussions rather than forcing our beliefs onto others. As physicist Richard Feynman once said, "I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." By embracing uncertainty and staying open to new possibilities, we create space for growth and progress. Science, philosophy, and life